But before we get into actually sort of managing the data, we actually have to acquire the data. And so this is what we're going to talk about now. Sort of what are the sources of data that you can tap into for your campaign, and where do you get started? Because for many campaigns, especially new candidates, or if this is the first time either you're running, or if you're running for a different office, or a different area, you need to be figuring out where you're going to get that initial data, start contacting people and mobilizing your community. And so a few things I like to start off with just saying, you just got to get started. So don't wait if you're going to be purchasing a list, or if you're going to be somebody's promising you to deliver a list. Don't let that hold up getting started with collecting data, going door-to-door canvassing. It's much more important to just to get out there, even if you don't have everything sorted out with your database yet and whatnot. But you want to start getting starting to practice, especially for the candidate, to practice going door-to-door. So even if you just got a blank piece of paper and you're going out and you're going door-to-door, it's better than nothing. If you're at an event, ideally you have a sign-up sheet or whatnot, but if not, and you just need, again, to get people to sign on a blank piece of paper, again, that's more important to get started. However, there are some very kind of simple things you can do to populate your database, either after you set up Nation Builder, or even if you're using, say, a spreadsheet before you set up your Nation Builder account. So what you want to do is, to get started, focus on your immediate contacts, your friends, family, colleagues that you think are supporters. So what I find campaigns do is, you've got a core team, let's say, of anywhere between 3 to, say, 10 people. And this is early stages, but it really starts with your immediate network. Before you start spending a whole lot of time talking with others and trying to get lists from sources and whatnot, start with the basics. Get people to go through their address books. It takes time, it takes discipline, but it's worth it. If you can start with 500 contacts, if you've got a team of 10 and everybody is putting in 50, you're going to get to that kind of level pretty quickly, and that's no small start, especially if those are very warm leads. And so what you want to do is start to gather that, and those aren't necessarily all supporters. It's not that you're necessarily adding them all to an email update list, but what you might want to do, you could import them as prospects. We'll go over that in the next section about importing, and you could work on converting those folks to be supporters. But likely, especially for candidates and others, if they're very close to you, you're going to be adding them as supporters, and you can start asking them to do things like volunteer or make a pledge to contribute. Or if you've registered already and you've got your bank account set up and your system set up, then you could ask them to make a donation. So that's friends and family. Getting lists from past election candidates, parties, certainly that's a great source. So if you know candidates that have run in the past, if you have party connections, if you whether that's at the municipal level or other levels, really you're looking for to get any list that is relatively recent, and that you have a good sense of where it came from, and to give you an idea in your jurisdiction, in your ward, where who's a supporter, where have signs, who took a sign in the past, and who made donations. And that brings us to the last point in terms of city of or Toronto as a source. You've got the ability to look at the City of Toronto site, and if you're in another city, look at the municipal site and go through the public financial reporting and the donor records, people that gave, and you can see who's given in the past. That's another good source. I'll go over in a moment an address list resource that DemocracyKit has published. In terms of organic growth, if we're already past the registration period, so it's unlikely that you're going to be launching an issue-based canvassing effort at this point. The example we had here is put Ward 11 on the map, which was an issue-based campaign that was gathering data before the registration, before the candidate had decided specifically to announce or decided that they would run. So that's one example of an issue-based campaign, better budgets, TO, and whatnot. And so at this point, though, you'll likely just be registering, and this is less relevant. Online and offline petitions, certainly interesting, could be applicable depending on what happens over the coming months. This is where you use, say, a third-party petition site like Petitions.to, and if you have access to the data, you can sometimes either work with a coalition of groups or whatnot to actually be identifying supporters around an issue. Now there are rules that you have to be aware of in terms of using that data and expenses for your campaign and third-party advertising rules. So that's a little bit outside the scope unless there are specific questions. But that's another way you can gather data sort of organically. You could also host a petition on your own site, and not necessarily a petition, more like say a sign up, or say you support a particular issue. So like say a park improvement, or a bike lane, or some neighborhood improvement, or local issue like that. You could host something, at least if not say a petition, it would be just to have people in the community show their support on social media by signing up. That's also a good way if you're emailing out to your list, say, show your support for this or that. And then purchasing lists, Bellwether Technologies is a source. There are several other sources. List purchases can range. They can, from several hundred to, pushing $1,000. With the reduced ward sizes in Toronto this election, it becomes even more difficult to afford these lists. The outside Toronto, again, with often smaller fundraising targets and whatnot, or ability to raise, that also is a challenge. So I've found that although purchasing lists is an option, it is a challenge for campaigns to afford. And so I'll just skip ahead and just mention this Toronto address list source. So this is actually, if you are in the city of Toronto, we have at DemocracyKit published a list of all the addresses allocated to new wards. So the city's open data catalog provides this data. So this is the source of this data, is the city's open data catalog. However, at the time we set this up a few weeks ago, the city had not organized this data by the new ward boundary. So what we did is essentially added postal code and then based on that assigned the new ward. So it's not it's a good data set if you have no other data and you need to start canvassing. You can go and download this your ward or the wards around your area. One caveat and one drawback of this data set is that for apartments, there is just one address in the system for the whole building. So that's obviously for downtown wards a significant drawback, and it's less of an issue if you're in some of the wards outside the core, but certainly that is a bit of a drawback. So what I want to do is just quickly go over to make sure you're comfortable using DemocracyKit. Through this course, we'll go over how to actually access resources on the site. So the main site, you go to democracykit.org. If you go to browse the resource library, in this case, actually it's right at the top of this list. It's a relatively newly added resource. If you go to the library and you can see here, we've got City of Toronto ward address lists. So you click on that resource, and then you'll see down here, we've always got under use the resource, a link to the resource, either Google Drive, or this case, this is actually a folder, a Google folder. So again, part of the reason we went over those core team tools previously is that we're using the Google Suite set of apps with DemocracyKit, and so there's some good integration if you're also on that platform. And you can see here we've got wards 1 through 47, so you can just download the CSV file, and as it is illustrated here, you've got all the fields, basically address, you've got postal code, so the full address as well as ward and type of address, and if it's a municipal, or sorry, if it's a, in some cases, there are names of organizations if it's a community center or whatnot. So while we're on that, I'd also just point out that the city has an access open data portal at map.toronto.ca/wellbeing. So again, if you're not in Toronto, your municipality may have a similar open data portal, and what you can do here is you can actually just browse in your ward of the city and actually search for things like, say, community, say, faith-based institutions or community centers, and often for, say, a faith institution or whatnot, they'll provide a phone number or an address. This is a good way to just start mapping out to make sure that you haven't missed key stakeholders or types of, say, ethnic groups or whatnot, or faith communities in your ward. So at your early planning stage, when you're mapping out your data collection, data acquisition kind of stage of your campaign, you want to be using a resource like this in your planning. I think in terms of data, sort of sources of data, that provides a picture. I want to get into some of the structuring of your data, but let's take any questions at this stage.